I'd love to talk about your career opportunities and that side of things as well, because again, this isn't just about MK's technology. This is also about your career. So with that, Jeff, I'll throw it to you to kick us off.
Yeah. So Hassan, why don't you just start by introducing yourself? Just kind of your name, your profession, where you're kind of headed. Just a little bit about yourself, even non-professionally too. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so my name's Hassan Kobeissi. I'm a third-year medical student at Central Michigan University. I attended the University of Michigan prior to medical school, where I majored in biomolecular science and English. And then following my undergraduate studies, I went for a master's in business management, also at University of Michigan, and then I started medical school. I'm from Michigan originally, and in my free time, I like to play tennis and I DJ also. So those are my hobbies. But in terms of professional aspirations, I'm probably heading in some sort of interventional field, probably neurointervention. So either neurosurgery, interventional radiology, or something up here. So that's the plan for me. Yep.
Awesome. So what was your kind of your experience with clinical and medical research prior to discovering NK, so to speak?
Right. So at my time at the University of Michigan, I was in two labs. One was a lab that was a neurosurgical lab that focused on glioblastoma, and that was bench work. So I was sitting there pipetting, injecting mice. It was your typical, when you think of lab research, that's what I was doing. And then I was in another lab also that was a general surgery lab. And for those medically minded people who know what ECMO is, I was in the lab that developed ECMO. So we would use the ECMO machine on sheep to try and make it better for humans, essentially improve it. It was pretty neat. I didn't really, in terms of my research before medical school and before Nest of Knowledge, I was not a fan of bench work because to me, the clinical impact was not there as much as what you can achieve. It takes the impact of the work is not as readily seen when you're doing that project. Like even till this day, I still don't know what my contributions led to in those labs. So I can bring it to present day if you want, Jeff.
Yeah, please do.
So I was introduced to NK in my first year of medical school. So it's been almost 2 years now, and I really like working in clinically related stuff. So a lot of my work focuses on mechanical thrombectomy for stroke and aneurysm coiling. And to me, it's nice because this is actual clinical stuff that makes a difference. So we're looking at actual outcomes in patients, interventions in patients, seeing what certain risk factors might contribute to patients doing better or worse following treatment, or what can influence patients' trajectory following treatment. And it's really, in my mind, I can see the actual impacts of my work much more clearly instead of doing basic science work, which of course has its place. But
yeah, well, part of the reason we're talking to you today is because we just noticed one day that you had 8 publications already. I think your name is mentioned. You're like first or second author on something like 14 projects within Nested Knowledge. A lot of them are in the neurointerventional space, like you mentioned. So what's your secret to being so prolific? Like what has enabled you to just over the past, in very short order, a couple of years really, as a medical student, just to really just pump out a bunch of literature? How have you been able to do that?
Right. So actually, since we last talked, I've gotten another 5 publications. So I have
there you go.
Now.
There you go.
You know, the secret lies in having a very systematic, don't mind the pun, a systematic methodology to producing the work. And for me, what facilitated that was really Nested Knowledge, because the software walks you through each step from inception of the search to the screening to the extraction, everything is in one software. So it's a very logical flow. So you come up with a topic, you run the search, and then right there you have the search results. You get to work on the screening. Next step would be the tagging, and then next step is the extraction. So the flow is really what impacts the efficiency of the projects, because if you're sort of all over the place, it's hard to produce large volumes of work because of the inefficiency that causes. And the workflow is really the number one thing. And of course, you have to be a motivated researcher as well, because ultimately the work has to get done somehow. But if you are motivated, then that is the number one thing that I would pinpoint that would impact the amount of volume you can produce.
Okay. So you started using Nested Knowledge rather early. I mean, we kind of would look at you as one of our early adopters, just because we're a young company, and so we haven't been around for all that long. So you've been using us from the beginning. What are some of the ways that Nested Knowledge helped you get off the ground and get your projects going so quickly early on?
Right. So when I first was introduced to Nested Knowledge, I had 0 publications. I did not even know what a systematic review was. I did not know what a meta-analysis was. And I was sort of, like I said, I was motivated. And then NK provided the tools for me to learn through and grow. So I remember my first project, it was, I'm going to pull up right now. So it was looking at thrombectomy with and without thrombolysis. And back then, that might as well have been Greek to me. But I sort of saw the process of how you first come up with a topic. So you have to do that yourself. I did that myself. And then you think about, what do you want to do? So you have to come up with your very focused topic, and you run the search. So we ran the search within Nested Knowledge, and the search returned, we'll call it 300 papers. And so then it was easy for me to see, okay, the next step is that we have to figure out what papers do we want to keep. So I observed how the exclusion criteria was formed, and I actually did the screening for that study, even though it was my first study, and it was very intuitive for me. So I would go and I would see the titles and the abstracts of the studies that were returned from the search, and I would know, okay, well, this study is a secondary analysis. It's not original data, so we have to exclude it. And the ease of the workflow made it very easy for me to understand what was happening, because if I was going into an Excel sheet and manually returning results from PubMed and had to go click on, it would have just not been feasible, frankly, for me to even participate in that project. So we did the screening, and what really helped me was that we had the dual screening enabled for that project. So because I was a novice, we had someone also more experienced on the team, and we would both screen the articles, and then they would be adjudicated by a third author. And that feature of the dual screening with the third author adjudication sort of helped me learn what I was doing right and wrong with my screening, so I could progress to becoming a more accurate screener in future studies. And then we moved on to the tagging feature at the tagging stage of that project. So during that stage, I sort of understood what exactly we were looking for in the papers. So we would say we'd configure our extraction, and let's say we were looking at modified Rankin scale 0 to 2 scores at 90 days, which is a good functional outcome after stroke. That's what that is. I would know exactly where to go in the paper, and then I would read it, and I would say, okay, well, the rate of MRS 0 to 2 at 90 days was 30 out of 48 patients. And that sort of workflow really helped me understand what was really happening within the project, instead of just sort of sitting there wondering, oh, where's this number coming from? Oh, why is this study included? How are we getting this conclusion? And the tagging facilitates the extraction stage really, really well, because you know exactly where the data is already, and you can go to that sentence and make sure that everything is correct. So we moved on to the extraction. We set up our 2 intervention arms right within NK, and we performed the extraction. It was also a dual extraction, so 2 authors looked at it and a third to adjudicate. And that was that. We sent it off to the statistics, and I was able to participate in the manuscript drafting and everything. But really the up until the manuscript drafting, which I know can be done in nested knowledge, but for that project we did it outside because back then it didn't have that feature.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, everything was done within the software, and that was a really important thing for me. It still is, but especially when I was starting out, to have everything in one place, because it helps to keep each project under one umbrella to know exactly what's happening. Especially now that I've grown to having, God, I must be in like 40 nests at this point or more.
Yeah.
To be able to click on a nest and see, okay, we're in the extraction stage, we're in the tagging stage, we're in the search stage. That really helps to separate each project into its own little like project. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me about a time when maybe a project wasn't going as smoothly as you would have hoped at first, or you ran into some sort of wall that you were able to overcome within our software. And how did you do that?
Yeah. So
maybe they all went smoothly. I don't know. I don't know.
I wish, right? I'm sorry, I'm looking at my project list. If
Sure.
there was one project that I would say was a bit tricky, I would have to say that it was this project that we were doing about, it's actually still in the works, but it was a very large project about every single randomized controlled trial about mechanical thrombectomy for stroke. So as you can imagine, I mean, this was a pretty ambitious project, and we ran the search within NK, and I think we returned something like 90 texts for full text screening. And for anyone that hasn't done a meta-analysis, that is too big of a number. So
yeah,
that project really tested all of our knowledge and our problem-solving skills, because we returned the search results, and we're like, okay, maybe our topic's too broad. Let's reconfigure our exclusion criteria and be maybe a little more narrow. So we started excluding certain trials that focused on strokes that were either too severe or not in the part of the brain that we were interested in. And then through the collaboration, we were able to narrow our exclusion criteria more, to have a more focused question. And we went through, we redid the screening to make sure that our new question was being answered. And we were able to narrow it down to finally, I think we're at 23 papers now. So you
much
can
more
see
manageable.
much more manageable. Still an ambitious undertaking, but 90 is simply not feasible. But 20, I mean, you can work with that, you know? So it was sort of having all the papers there in the study inspector. We were looking at them and we were saying, okay, well, this paper, maybe not the best for our study because the stroke was too severe. This paper, yeah, probably not the best either because it was in the posterior circulation. Sure. So it was that kind of thing where we had all the studies laid out in front of us, and we were able to start refining our question a little more narrowly while still having an ambitious research question, but a much more manageable one.
Sure. What does NK do to improve the speed at which you complete these projects? Because that's part of it too, right?
Yeah. So instead of having to manually pull up an Excel sheet, which I've never even done, to be honest. So I've maybe been spoiled by using the software since day one. But you have just the outline of the workflow is so fluid. You run the search, you configure your criteria for exclusion. You tell, if you're on a team, you can delegate the screening to 2 people. You tell them, okay, you know, you 2 can take the screening and I'll be the adjudicator. And then you can see that the screening is completed, and you know that the next step, instead of sitting there figuring, oh, what's the next step going to be? What's the next step? You know exactly what the next step is going to be. And then the 2 things that I would say are really great in NK are the data extraction and the tagging. So these really speed up the research process and increase the efficiency. So I'll speak to extraction because that is where I spend a lot of time. And within NK, extraction is very well thought out, I guess I'll say. So it's very logical. You open up a study, you're on the extraction page. So it seems like a daunting task at first. You might be extracting 15, 20 outcomes and variables. and you're going to sit there like, oh my God, how am I going to keep this organized? It's too much. But within NK, it's very easy. So nested knowledge allows me to say, here's my two interventions. I have mechanical thrombectomy without thrombolysis and mechanical thrombectomy with thrombolysis. And from there, I'll input the amount of patients in each arm, and it will auto-populate every single field for me under there. So if I'm extracting the rate of good functional outcome at 90 days, I don't have to type that. I already configured it in under my tagging step, and it will auto-populate the amount of patients in each arm from the data that I put. And all I simply have to do is go into the text and look at the table and say, okay, 30 patients in the thrombolysis arm and 28 in the non-thrombolysis arm achieve good functional outcome. And it will do that for every single outcome we're interested in without me having to manually go back and say, oh, what was that outcome? Oh, how many patients were in that arm? What are we looking for? The extraction is very seamless with nested knowledge. And the best part of it is, after you do the extraction, you hit complete, and then you go to export, and it spits out an Excel sheet with everything beautifully laid out for you. And the statistician loves me after that.
Sure. I bet they do. Yeah. So if others were to kind of follow in your footsteps, so you're a third-year medical student, as you mentioned, and if other people pick up NK and start to use it at the same kind of stage in their careers that you're in, what would change about medicine and medical communication as a whole, if anything?
Right. So, speaking to medical students as a medical student myself, and people who have not done research before under one umbrella, it's a very daunting task. I didn't even understand how any of it worked when I first started. And to some people, that thought alone of not really understanding the research process and where do I even start and how much stuff do I have to do when you don't know the steps, it's tough. So I think if students were able to pick it up, or anyone who's a beginner and research and an expert, but really we're focusing on the beginners, like you mentioned, I think that they would be able to produce, contribute to the literature much more often and readily than they are right now, because I know, speaking to my peers, that they felt this sort of overwhelming sense of how do I get started? How do I do research?
Sure.
And the more people that we have doing research, especially systematic reviews and meta-analyses, because those are the highest level of evidence, I really think that would be able to help push clinical medicine forward and identify gaps in the literature where future work could be done. I mean, some of my own papers we were looking at, I know that they're going to be used in clinical practice, and it's nice to be able to contribute as a medical student to actual patients' lives and help physicians with treatment and, just help further medicine.
Wow. Yeah, that's I'm sure that's really a gratifying feeling. Of all the papers that you published, which a lot of papers at this point, right? This is great. What's most interesting to you, or what paper or what finding were you most proud of when because you mentioned early on in this interview that you were just excited that you could contribute to medicine in a really recognizable way. It felt really measurable to you. So when you measure that, what stands out?
Yeah, so there have been a lot, to be honest, but there are a couple I can't speak to because they're under the peer review process right now. But
Sure,
of the
sure.
ones that I have published, there was one in the Journal of Neurointerventional Surgery, which is one of the top journals for neurointervention. It's for anyone that knows what impact factor is, it's around 9, so pretty high. And I designed this project myself, and what we were looking at is in the first 24 hours following treatment, if a patient's neurological status improves to a certain amount, how predictive is that of how well they're going to do in 3 months from now? Mm-hmm. And for me, this was a nice project because imagine it was your loved one that went and had a stroke, and within the first 24 hours, there's so many uncertainties. You're wondering what's the rest of their life going to be like? Are they going to be disabled forever? Are they going to get better? And this paper that we did, that we published, was really impactful because we were able to quantify what are the odds of someone improving to having a good functional outcome at 90 days, just within the first 24 hours. And I feel like that will give clinicians data to back up their statements when patients say, "Oh, is my dad going to be okay after this stroke?" And then you tell them, "Well, it's only been 24 hours, but based on their current improvement, we know in the literature that it says that at 90 days, there's this odds of having good functional outcome." I mean, that's a tangible, it probably
Yes.
happens every day. It's a very
Yes.
tangible result that I feel would impact clinical practice.
Awesome. Awesome.
Can I jump in and ask, Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, how does this, or maybe I'll just open it up to, tell me about your work with senior physicians and PIs. How does this get you out into the actual research world and the world of practice? Give you those connections.
Yeah, so working within Nested Knowledge, I've met a lot of people, and I'm a medical student in Michigan, and not one person I work with is from Michigan, from the state at all. So it's quite interesting. I've met people all over the country at this point, and working with my senior physicians who were the PIs, who were Dr. Haidt out of Stanford, and then Dr. Kalmus out of Mayo. They really introduced me to this whole world of clinical research, and I saw how collaborations were facilitated among physicians in the same field. And now myself, a year later, 2 years later, I've started cultivating those own collaborations myself. I actually have a meeting tomorrow with some people I met through Nested Knowledge. I text, literally on my phone, I text them about ideas for new projects. And it's nice because when the senior authors sort of provide guidance for you, it really allows you to grow as a researcher yourself. And then you start having that spark yourself. Be like, oh, I really like working with XYZ on this project. Why don't I reach out to them and say, hey, why don't we start this new project? And people are really open to collaborating, especially when you've worked with them on other projects. And then when you start to build a track record, it sort of all just spirals on itself. And I really did meet a lot of people through Nested Knowledge those are the people I still work with today. And we've started to incorporate others as well that were interested in doing work.
Awesome. Are you looking for more collaborators on certain topics that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so at this point, we are always looking for collaborators because the rate limiting step in producing the research is my time, because that's a finite resource, and anyone else that's leading projects knows this very well. So obviously with a systematic review and meta-analysis, it's all about being thorough and making sure that your data is accurate, that your search results were comprehensive, so the more people that are open to collaborating, the better, because there's a role for everyone on the team. Whether that role is creating statistics, tables, doing the risk of bias, doing data screening, data extraction, there's no shortage of roles, but there is a shortage of people. So we're always looking for people who are motivated researchers. Doesn't matter what stage of their research career they're at. As long as there's a willingness to learn and work, then there's a place for you for sure.
Awesome. How has NK kind of changed how you do your research, how you approach research? And maybe to expand that question, how has NK changed research for your readers or for journals, that whole publication process? Because it's a process you're familiar with, right?
Yep, I'm very familiar with the process. Frankly, if I were doing a systematic review and meta-analysis, I could not imagine doing it without Nested Knowledge. I've never done one without Nested Knowledge, and it would be a nightmare to even try to do it without Nested Knowledge now that I'm so well versed in the software. I think that, one of our papers we published was looking at Nested Knowledge subjectively. It was accepted to a journal, Frontiers in Neurology, and the reviewers took quite an interest in the Nested Knowledge software, and they really liked how everything was transparent, so they can go click on the link themselves to the Nest and see our extraction, our results. I have a paper under review right now, and we've published a number of different papers on their similar topic that is a systematic review called a common data element analysis. And these papers really take advantage of nested knowledge's tagging feature. So within my actual publication, there will be a link to nested knowledge where people can go click on our nest and they will see our study has 14 papers, and you can see the amount of papers out of 14 that had a specific tag. And that really facilitates like transparency, interaction with your audience, and it really allows you to report more interactive results in a way that anyone who's a reader can say, oh, okay, here's how they reached this conclusion. Okay, this is the studies that featured this tag. It really, like traditional publications are sort of limited in the way that you can present data, but within nested knowledge, it's very easy and intuitive for readers to understand exactly where our data came from and why we're reaching the conclusions that we were reaching.
Awesome. So if I ask you to turn around and write a grant designing your trial that you're going to run as a PI at an institution on, say, comparing thrombectomy devices, how would you start?
Right. So this is a good question, Kevin, because the underlying problem with a lot of trials today is that there's too much heterogeneity in the outcome reporting, and this is a gap in the literature that we at Nested Knowledge have sort of aimed to address through the software. And if I were to go design a thrombectomy trial tomorrow, I would go and I would look at our publication on common data elements about regarding mechanical thrombectomy and stroke, and I would try to find those data elements that were most reported in studies, because having data elements and outcomes reported in a standardized way really facilitates secondary meta-analyses and systematic reviews. And that would allow more confidence in the results of trials when you understand that the data being reported in every single trial is reported in the same way. I really think that the common data element is, the NIH itself has really identified this, and Nested Knowledge is a great tool to bridge that gap in the literature for sure. I would go on that nest and I would say, okay, here's how every study reported an outcome, and here's how we're going to do it to match the common way.
Got it. What would you recommend to other med students interested in expanding their research, their publication record, and getting themselves out there, starting to collaborate in your space or just generally in just the field of medical research?
Right. So I would first identify a topic you're interested in. That's number one thing. And then at that point, there's a bunch of different ways you could go about it. But the way that I think the most success could be had is you simply reach out to people and you tell them, hey, I really like your work. I would love to join with you on a project. It's never not worked out for me. And people are generally very receptive to having more people join the team. Like I said, there's always work to go around. I think that if a medical student or researcher shows initiative, then and a willingness to work and learn, there's definitely a place for you. You just have to don't be shy about reaching out and expressing your interest. And even if you want to reach out to me, go for it. I mean, like I said, we're always looking for people. No one's going to be upset at you reaching out, but they're going to be happy to have more people on the team for sure.
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay. Well, selfishly, so I'm the like the chief design officer, right? So I'm in charge of making sure that the UI looks right, helping to kind of figure out where each new feature should live, that sort of thing. Tell me about your favorite feature. I want to know, what do you love about NK?
So I would say my favorite feature in NK is the extraction page.
Okay. Really? Really? That's not very common. People don't say that very often to me, but okay.
That is my own personal answer. I really like the intuitive nature of the extraction page. It's all laid out for you on one screen. It's a very nice workflow. You say, here are the data I need, and right here it is on the left side in the paper. And you can go in and find number here, number here, number here. It's way easier to avoid mistakes than having to go in a spreadsheet and look all over the place. And now, in terms of what I think within Nested Knowledge, what will facilitate future research is definitely the tagging feature. That is going to be what pushes research forward, because that opens up a whole new world of transparency of where interested readers can go into the nest and they can say, yep, here's the variable I'm interested in, MRS 0 to 2 in 90 days. How did each study report this, and what was each study's outcome? Well, great. You go click on nested knowledge, and you go to the synthesis, and you click, and it's all right there. It says 9 out of 10 studies said MRS 0 to 2. You click on it, and it'll tell you every single study and the excerpt of where we extracted MRS 0. It's a perfect feature for data transparency and visualization. The feature I'm most proud of, I take a little credit for getting incorporated, is the commenting feature, because when I first started, there was no intra-nest communication, and I really view that helps to keep each nest separated, which is what I was talking about earlier, about how each nest is on its own little project. So it helps to keep everything straight.
Yeah. Is there anything we could do to make comments even better?
No, it's perfect.
Okay. Very, very favorable outlook on NK. That's great.
I don't even know what kind of features you guys could add anymore, to be honest.
Yeah, man, we're trying to just crank out everything that people asked for at this point. But of course, don't hesitate to reach out if you have anything that you want that would make your life easier. Just shoot me an email or null test or whatever. So that's great. Cool, Kevin. Any other further questions?
Yeah, I guess I'd just ask you, and this isn't a nested knowledge question. This is a you question. What do you think's next in your medical career?
There you go.
Yeah, that's a good question, Kevin. Before I got into research, I didn't really know what direction I want to take my career in, but every publication I get is like a new high, and I just want to keep chasing that high. And I really enjoy working on my research. I for sure will be doing research for the rest of my life, and that I did not have that spark before I got my first. The first time I saw my name in print, I can't even describe the feeling. I was like, wow, like pinch me. And I really like working on research. I really like meeting people. I definitely want to continue doing research. And then, I'll be applying to residency in less than a year now. So that's definitely the next big step for me, is where am I going to do residency? What field am I going to go into? There's a lot in the future for sure. The only thing I know in terms of what I want is to keep doing research. So that's a non-negotiable for me.
Nice.
Amazing. If you have any, once we get this case study out there, and there are tons of med students who want to be like you, how should they get in touch?
Hang out. I'll give you guys my LinkedIn and my email.
Awesome. Okay. Well, congrats on 15 papers now. I can't even keep track of it myself. I was trying to research you before this call. I was trying to understand how many publications you have, and it just seems to increase. So that's awesome. And good luck to you wherever you're headed next.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.